Relationships, long-term relationships, let's face it, they're hard. They take a lot of work. You've heard it over and over again. Communication is the key to a great relationship. But what does that mean? You see, a few years ago, my wife and I were talking, and despite all the great things about our relationship, we were just simply dysfunctional when it came to solving certain problems together until we learned and started practicing almost daily the system we're going to talk about today.
Welcome to the Evolve Podcast, a podcast about disrupting your life to spark new evolution. Evolve your body, evolve your mind, evolve your soul, and evolve your tribe. And now it's time to disrupt.
Miles, look who we have with us today. Is my beautiful bride of almost 25 years joining us on the podcast today. And I'd love to say that we are in the same room, but unfortunately the sound didn't work and something's off with our system, but she's right next door.
Yeah, so whatever. It works.
It works, right? And with that, folks, we want to welcome you to another episode of the Evolve Podcast. Joining me, as always, from Oberlin, Ohio, the most interesting man that I know is W. Miles Riley. Welcome, Miles.
Hey, here we go. I think your intro should have had written in it was the hardest hitting southpaw woman in the whole state of Utah.
Well, we haven't got to hers yet. We're introducing you as her boxing coach. But somewhere in the mountains of Utah, I am Steve Cutler. And tonight we have probably the most important guest we've had on the podcast. And Miles, she was a tough guest to get on. Let's face it. I mean, joining us today is my beautiful bride of almost 25 years, Danielle Cutler. For our listeners who have not met Danielle, Danielle is a mother of 3 smart kids. She's a financial professional, an artist, a creator, a musician, and a former fitness competitor. And she does throw a mean southpaw, as Miles well knows, as her boxing coach.
Yes.
Danielle, thanks for joining us.
And you.
That is true. And since you opened that up.
There is a story there.
We're going to tell that. Can we tell that story?
Yes.
So we got married almost 25 years ago. And, I'd been, like most people in college, you were living with roommates, you had friends, and so you played pranks on each other. Well, Dan and I got married, and I thought it would really be funny to play a prank on her when she got into the shower at one point. And what I didn't know at the time is there are very few things that Danielle hates more than being cold. So here she is in the shower, and I sneak my way into the bathroom. We've got one of those showers where the shower curtain is pulled so she can't see that I'm coming in. And I take a cup of cold water and I pour it on her head, and I get no response, like absolutely no response. You would think that there's going to be a scream or something, right? So after getting no response, I slowly pull the curtain back and I see this almost terrified girl sitting in the corner. And without even thinking about it, that left hook came out and he smacked me right in my eye.
I like it.
He got it.
I was so shocked.
He shocked me. Like, who wants cold water poured on him when they're taking a nice hot shower? And I was like, cold water dumped on my head, so he got popped.
I like it.
I just started laughing. I mean, this is like the antithesis of who Danielle is. She is the kindest person in the world. Everybody that knows her just falls in love with her and knows how kind she is. And so this is the exact opposite of who she is. I just had to laugh. And that actually became a really interesting thing for us where we now use the term cold water. When something is that we do to each other that really bothers us, we look at that and say, hey, that's a cold water. And we know that that's just somewhere that we don't
you went too far. It was a trigger though. Like I wasn't even like, oh, I'm going to punch you in the face. It just happened. Like he opened the thing and it was like a knee jerk reaction. I'm like, punch without thinking.
And it was pretty funny. Like it really was funny.
But I understand if you do something wrong, Steve, that she doesn't like, she can say that was cold water. What do
Mm-hmm.
you say?
We just use the same term.
Yeah,
Because the
that's
cold
just
water, that's a
that's
common
it.
language now. So if she does something, I'll say, hey, that's cold water. And we just know
Okay.
not to tread there. It becomes
Well, I'm
something
glad
where
we're
we have to
talking
take a
about
step back.
language then, because I'm going to take both of you to task with this, because that should not be yours, Steve. Yours is something
Okay.
else. Okay.
Yeah,
I,
okay.
so
Thanks,
now
thanks for
we
the
have to find
relationship advice.
Yep.
we have to find Steve's term, and then I need a term for me. Even though I'm not in a relationship, I know things that piss me off. I got to figure out what the term would be. Oh, this is
Hey,
already
I like
interesting.
it because then it's then
you
it's
can steal the
where
cold water.
yours is. What is it for you? Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
we try
we're
and just
off and
come up with
running.
a common term. And
Yeah.
cold water is one, but we've got other common terms that we use or common phrases for
Uh-huh.
other situations that we know what we're talking about. You know, some of them I think came from me, some of them came from Danielle, and so we just have adopted them. We look at our relationship as there's you, there's me, and there's we. So there's essentially three parts to this relationship. There's
Yeah.
Danielle's needs, there's my needs, and then there's the needs of the relationship that are important.
Yeah.
And so when
Yeah.
it comes to the need of the relationship, we just thought, hey, that's a pretty common thing that both of us can remember, because it was pretty shocking to me. I think it was pretty shocking to Danielle because um, again, it was so reactionary that it's
Yeah,
just
I didn't
that's
think
not
about
how
it.
she is. And so we've laughed about it a lot over the last 25 or so years.
I like that her reaction was violent.
Yeah.
I actually do too.
No, I really do. I mean, seriously,
No,
like
I'm serious. Yeah,
you would get you would think, a lot of people's reaction would be more about flight, screaming or hollering or running or whatever. But
right.
you threw a punch. I really like that, because that means like your automatic response in a situation that you're losing is not to cower away but to strike out.
Yeah.
Back.
So
Yes.
I really like your response.
Yeah. That segues right into what we're talking about today of nonviolent communication. Or I went violent.
Yeah, that was more of our violent communication. I think there is, like Miles is talking about, there's room for violence in life,
Oh
and
yeah.
and a fight. It has to be there. But yeah, you're right. It is a great segue. I mean, what we're going to talk about today, it's we've been talking about putting this on the podcast for several months now. I mean, Miles and I have talked about it in several of our conversations. Obviously, Danielle and I practice this on almost a daily basis. Um, but I'm excited for our guests to really engage with this particular episode, because I think that this topic and this methodology that we're going to be discussing today, it's something that's going to have immediate impact on people. And I know that far too often people use that term, right? Far too often when somebody's trying to sell something, they'll say, oh, you're going to see an immediate impact. This truly is a topic and a technique that has immediate impact. When you start to learn how to use this methodology of nonviolent communication, you will see the results in your first communication. So it's got immediate impact, and I'm really excited for our guests, or excuse me, for our listeners to learn about this practice. So, how we doing? Are we ready to get going?
We are ready to get going, but let me just add something and see what you and Danielle think about what I'm about to say. Is if we're going to talk about nonviolent communication, should we spend a few minutes just talking about communication, period?
Yeah, great thought. You
Because
you
that
lead
can,
out on that one, and then we'll bring
Yeah,
it back to the practice.
you go,
yeah.
Miles. We'll go with you.
Well, because the reason why I brought it up is because I have this idea that I play with all the time, that every interpersonal situation or intrapersonal situation calls for its own form of language. Steve and I have talked about that before. I can't
Yep.
I can't talk to Tiago the way I talk to Steve. Tiago
Hmm.
perceives the world in a certain way. A 14-year-old boy, Steve's a grown man. I can't talk to Steve the way I talk to Alicia. I can't talk to the three of them the way I talk to myself. So it's almost as if you have to become an artist with language because you're crafting language in its nuances to get your message across. So you can't talk to people the same way. You can't talk to the same person the same way in different situations, let alone talking differently to different people. And I
Yep.
think as we get older, we get a set of language or vocabulary that we codify and we spread it across the board with no matter who we're talking to, or if we're not aware of how language gets used, we miss that. I notice I don't talk to this person the way I talk to that person, the way I talk to that person. And if you're unaware of it, you can't use it as a tool.
Yeah, and I think you make a really interesting point. When you think about language, far too often when we learn a language, we forget to learn another part of that language, a deeper level to that language. We forget to talk to the person that's sitting across from us and learn their language. What do
Right.
they need? How are they interacting with the world? How do they see the world? And what resonates with them? Just like we were talking about earlier, cold water to Danielle meant something, right? That meant this is a no-go zone. And so then we adopted that into our language. Now, if somebody didn't listen to this podcast, they didn't know us, and they didn't know that that was some sort of the lexicon that we use in our relationship, and they heard us use the term cold water, they would probably think we're talking about cold water coming out of the tap or cold water
Right.
that's in the bathtub or whatever it is. They have no
Right.
idea what the definition, but the definition
Or something
is
kinky.
totally different. They might think it's kinky, yeah. Depending on where their mind is,
I
it'll
know,
be
right?
like you, Miles.
Right. But yeah, that's exactly what it is. I agree, Miles, because for me, the cold bar, that was my language of like, that was like, why would you do that to me? That's not funny. That was an awful experience. That made that I got no humor out of that. That was shocking. That wasn't funny. And to somebody else, it might be like, that was so funny. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna get you back. I'm gonna like one up you, or whatever, like where I took it that certain way. So it is all about the like delicacies of who you're dealing with and being able to for your wavelengths to come together where you're not like on these different
Yeah, yeah.
yeah
It
And
really is
it's
about
almost,
lining up those wavelengths. Yeah, you're right. I mean,
yeah,
everybody has a different resonance and
uh-huh
understanding what those wavelengths are. Now, I would say that 25 years in, we probably would both look at something like that and think it's funny and want to up each other because the relationship has
yeah
changed over the
right. I
years,
was young.
right?
Yeah,
But
it's very different 25 years ago, and I was so young,
yeah,
and it was yeah very different. I would definitely like try to one up you or chase you through the house, or something would be different. But back then that was just like, oh my gosh, why would you do that to me? It was not funny. I don't know.
I would think now it would be a left, a right, and a hook.
Yeah,
it might
yeah,
be.
it was just
Yeah.
one pop. It would be a 1-2 uppercut, cross, bob and
Now you
weave.
taught her how to fight really
Miles
well,
taught me the
Miles.
full
Yeah.
sequence. Well, there would be some kicks in there too, because I'm actually really better. I'm better at my kicks than my punches.
Yeah, the
Well,
kicks are pretty impressive.
let's play with this idea then, because I'm thinking of how intrusive cold water thrown on somebody in the shower
Yeah, that's
could be.
intrusive. Yes.
And I think of, first of all, you're in the
You
shower.
just gave her a new part of the
Yes,
language. It's intrusive.
it was
Because
intrusive. It
think
was.
about it. You have to close when you get in the shower. Think about the privacy element and not the privacy, well, the part of the privacy, but just a sense of your own aloneness, and you get into your own zone. In order to do that, you have to
Zoned
close
out.
two
Yeah.
doors. You
Yeah.
close the bathroom door and you close the shower door. So you really think that you're just insulated and it's just you and yourself
And steam. And it's the
and
steam
steam.
and
And
steam.
again,
Don't forget
it's
the
this.
steam.
You got all these elements of ultimate privacy, and somebody has penetrated both those doors. And one of the doors they didn't penetrate; they went over. That's such a
Yes.
violent, intrusive act.
Ah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
So if we think
Yes.
of there's these two doors as metaphors of talking to people and understanding the two doors that they have closed, metaphorically speaking.
I love it.
Instead of intruding through those two doors, how do we open them gently to receive the message of cold water so they can accept cold water?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's a great question. And that's
I
actually
love
what
it.
this practice that we're going to talk about does. It's a way of identifying how do we not step on another person's thoughts, feelings, and emotions. But
Yeah,
I think part
yeah.
of what's really impactful. See, now we're telling you the shortened version of cold water, right? I told you the funny story. I told you where we're at now. That cold water means something. What I didn't tell you was that it took us probably 2 or 3 years to figure out this idea that cold water needed to be code for us for
Mm,
something that that's a no-go zone. So there was a lot of mistakes along the way. There were a lot of uh, barriers and boundaries that were crossed and stepped over, and emotions that were thrown aside, or emotions that were just not even really understood until we finally
Mhm.
got to the point where we understood. And some of that, I think, when you think about communication, great communication happens when both parties listen to each other well, and both parties are also are able to communicate what their emotions and what their needs are. Now, if there's
Mhm.
a breakdown in either one of those sides of the communication, then the whole situation breaks down. And like I said in the introduction, we found ourselves 20 plus years into this thing we call a relationship and a marriage and said, wow, we still really suck at certain problem solving resolution type things. We're really dysfunctional. And what we
mm,
found was that, we would have these ways of navigating, we'd have these ways of doing things, and we'd get through it, but neither one of us would feel great about it. Like, let's say
Mhm.
that we were working through a problem or a situation, and uh, it ended up being that maybe Danielle would acquiesce and say, okay, well, let's do this. Well, I didn't feel good because I'm not wanting her to just go with my way. I don't think my way is the best way. And she didn't feel good because she wasn't fully expressing what was inside of her. And so, regardless of what a person's relationship is with their partner, because there's always going to be one that might be a little bit more um, dominant communicator and one that might be a little bit more submissive communicator, this process works on both ends. Because
Mhm.
while there's one that could be aggressive, the other one could be passive aggressive. And the key in that, and Danielle and I've talked about this multiple times over the years, aggressive is still the term that fits into both sides. If somebody is passive aggressive, it doesn't mean that it's a better way to go. And here she is punching. But
That's where
but it
my
essentially
punch
boils
came.
down
Yeah, who was the aggressive one? Who's the passive aggressive? What do you think?
to you were definitely the aggressive one in that time.
Yeah, yeah, always.
Yeah.
I was the
Yeah,
aggressor.
always. Yeah, always. So let's jump into and build off of what we talked about so far. Just jump into where this concept came from. So, um, I can't remember where I got introduced to this book, but Marshall Rosenberg, he wrote a book called Nonviolent Communication. And the way that it was introduced to me is the same way I'm going to introduce it to our leaders, or excuse me, to our listeners. And that is that it's probably the worst name for the best book you'll ever read. Nonviolent communication doesn't really explain what this process is. In a way, it does because it's a way of taking out um, enmity. It's a way of taking out the little digs. It's a way of taking out the passive aggressiveness. It's a way of taking out the aggressiveness of the communication. And it's a way of getting two people to the table that sometimes are at odds, either with each other or with an idea. And so in this book that Rosenberg uh, wrote, he details out this process that he used not just in relationships between husbands and wives, but Rosenberg was a person that would get called if there were literally countries warring with each other and they were at a stalemate and they needed to figure out, okay, you're bombing this person, you're bombing that person. We got to get to the table and figure out a way to not bomb each other. And so that's where this idea of nonviolent communication, how do we communicate so it doesn't lead to this violence? So, let me tell you a little bit of our backstory. So a few years back, we were in the midst of a disagreement, and we just really came to the realization that while we had always gotten along pretty well, we love each other, we enjoy spending time together, that we didn't have skills, we didn't have a system, we didn't have a tool that we could use effectively to work through conflict in a simple and elegant way. And one of the things that's always been important to us is that we express love to each other in a way that is important for each other. I receive love different than Danielle does. And so that's always been a big thing for us. And so what was happening is we would build up this goodwill with each other throughout the month or throughout the year. And then we would reach a point where there would be a disagreement or an argument, and it would just go and go and go. And we would literally go into this cycle of at some point we'd look at each other and say, well, what the hell are we really even arguing about? What the hell are we disagreeing about that? And Rosenberg's book opened up this concept to me. And I went to Danielle and I said, hey, I bought you this book too. And I want you to read it. And I want to talk about if you're open to this idea of practicing this so that we get good at it. Now, growing up loving basketball, and Miles, I know you love basketball as well. How many free throws did we shoot back in the day when we were learning to play? And then even when we were playing and we're playing in games, right? The free throw concept was that you go to practice and you shoot the free throw and you do it when nobody else is around. You do it when the game is not on the line, and you get used to doing that same motion over and over and over again. And the idea is that you train your nervous system by doing this practice over and over again. When you get into that heightened state, then if you just go back to your practice, you're able to shoot the free throws, and the pressure of the game-winning shot or just the pressure of the crowd is not going to make you buckle. And so after Danielle read the book and we talked through it and, hey, what do you like about this? What don't you like? Okay, now how can we make it simple? And so we took this free throw concept and we said, what if every single day we just practice? And I would say 9 times out of 10, when we practice, we're not practicing on each other with anything that has to do with each other. So, for instance, we're not talking about some sort of conflict that has come up between us or a disagreement. When we go through the practice every single day, we're literally just practicing on something that's dealing with us. And what the practice does is it fosters good communication within us. Now, we've done this now for, God, how long, Danielle?
I don't know. I was just thinking about that when you were talking. Like, when did we start this? How long has this been? I can't remember.
It's been over a year, maybe 2 years.
Okay, a year.
I don't know, maybe a couple of years.
Yeah.
So what we did is we started every day just practicing and saying, okay, let's run through the practice. And in doing the practice, we saw immediate results. And then when we would go into a more heightened state of communication where tensions were higher, it made the practice, or it made it a lot easier. And I would say more often than not, we would just fall into the practice. Every once in a while, we get into something where we're going back and forth and it turns into more of a bickering at each other. And one of us invariably will look at the other one and say, wait a minute, let's go into our practice. And then we take a deep breath and we go into the practice immediately. Now, here's one caution that I would tell you for our listeners. There's a lot of studies out there that have studied the effectiveness of the importance, I should say, of your emotional state and the way that your nervous system is set up when you go into conflict. And if you go into a conflict situation and you're heightened, if you are angry, if you're frustrated, if you feel like you are emotionally hijacked, and what we mean by that is that you're not thinking clearly. You know you've got some blind spots and you feel what you're about to say more than you're thinking about what you're going to say, then that's a time to hit the pause button. And what science has shown is that you need a minimum of 25 to 30 minutes to let your system downregulate, and then you go back into a conflict situation. So part of the practice really is twofold. If you practice on a regular basis, now we do it most days of the week, that's going to make a big difference. The second part of the practice is what I just said, that if you're going into a difficult situation, you're trying to resolve a conflict and the emotions are taking over, you need to take a pause, and it needs to be at least 25 to 30 minutes. What we've found, just from our own practice and from reading the science and how the nervous system works, is if we hit pause, one of us, or sometimes both of us, will go for a walk, and we'll go for a walk together and we don't even talk, or one of us will go for a walk because that's an easy way. You see, we talked about the fight response, Miles, as you mentioned before. So there's fight, there's flight, and then there's freeze. And the flight response can be initiated as soon as you go for a walk. But what happens is your body will understand that it's going into this flight. You're going away from it. But because walking starts to work on that parasympathetic part of the nervous system, it brings the emotions down. And so a 20 to 30-minute walk will bring your emotions down. It will help to reset you. And then you can go back into that difficult conversation. So those are the two keys: practicing it every day. And then when you get into a difficult situation, make sure that your emotional state is ready. All right. So Danielle, for our listeners, do you want to walk them through what our process is and what we do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so now we modified it like ever so slightly, but so now we start. It could be we take like 2 minutes. It could be that we each take like 10 minutes. Just kind of depends on the time we have and then what's on our minds. But we start with just saying what we are, what's something positive that's going on right now in our world. What is it? Something that is just, that's it, just something that's positive. So it could just really be anything. And so that we're just always starting off on a good tone for the day, and not focusing on negative things. And then our next piece is to say how that what to identify how we're feeling. And then again, this could be anything. And then like Steve said, this is not like a conflict situation between us. It's just purely, I'm feeling tired today, or I'm feeling a little anxious about this upcoming thing at work, or I'm feeling really excited about the weekend, or I'm feeling a little bit disconnected, and whatever it is, or it could be a multiple. It could be like two or three, you know, feelings that you've identified. So you just kind of get out, it's just a little gut check. What's inside right now? What's inside of my gut? How am I feeling? What's in there? And then the next thing we identify is, what are my needs? So after all my feelings, what needs are coming based on what those feelings are? What is it comes from that? And then the last thing is the strategy of, okay, so here's my feelings, here's what my needs are, what's my strategy? How am I going to do it? How am I going to tackle this? How am I going to kind of get my feet wet with this problem and try to problem solve it, so I'm meeting my needs and my feelings are being addressed? So it's positives, identify your feelings, needs, and strategy. And then with the whole nonviolent communication thing, the beauty of it is you are 100% owning your own state and how you're feeling. And the biggest thing that this has done for me, and I think our relationship, it's taken away the blame of casting how you're feeling and blaming it on somebody else. That it's 100% you own it. It's mine. The strategy, the needs might be where it comes into the relationship of, this is where we can come together on it. It's 100%, I own it. This is mine.
Yeah,
Yeah,
what's that
great
famous
description.
definition of anger? They said anger is what you do to yourself after the other person has left the room.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Anger and bitterness. Yeah, I think like Danielle said, it really has brought a certain level of emotional accountability for both of us. Um, and going back to what you were talking about earlier, Miles, this is something that has brought a lot more language to our vocabulary. When Danielle's saying
Yeah.
that we go into, okay, here's how I'm feeling, and we don't really delineate between an emotion and a feeling. We know that, like, there might be a sensation. I might be feeling a sensation of an anxious energy. I could call that an emotion, or I could just feel it somewhere in my body, and it's a sensation. And we don't care. We've gotten to the point where we want to recognize the feeling and or the emotion. And this could be anything from I'm feeling really happy, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling stressed, or as Danielle said earlier, I'm feeling tired. I mean, this last week I've been dealing with this head cold, and so I think every day that we've talked, I've said I feel tired, I feel like shit, I feel like, I mean, there's multiple ways I could describe it, but identifying the feeling or emotion, that's, it's paramount that we do that. And one of the keys that I want to make sure that we point out is, if you haven't picked up on it, what we're not doing is we're not saying you made me feel this way. And we don't do that in our communication when it comes to conflict, because what we realize and we know and we live in this space right now is that how I feel is 100% mine. It's nobody
Mhm.
else's. Somebody cuts me off in traffic, it might spark a feeling in me. But then if I follow that feeling and it turns into an emotion of anger or frustration, well, that's because my focus is there. Now, Danielle may do something, or let's say that when I threw the cold water on her, right? I created the stimulus. Now, her initial response to that is physiological. It's not something that she
Shock.
can't sit there and say, yeah, there was a shock to it, right? We're not going to lie about that and say, no, I don't feel the shock. This is not about emotional blindness. This is about recognizing what the feeling is. But she feels that emotional shock or that physical shock, and then it might turn into something that's emotional. And she may say, hey, that physical shock made me feel emotionally unsafe, because I don't want to be uncomfortable physically. I don't want to. That's not funny to me. There are many things about that that don't make me feel safe and comfortable. And then she might go into her need and say, I have a need to feel safe and comfortable in our relationship, right? She's owning the feeling, the emotion, and then she's owning what her need is relative to that emotion. Now, before we go any further, I want to go back to the modification that we made. So Rosenberg's methodology is emotion, need, strategy. Now, where we've changed it and we've evolved it, we did that for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think that human beings are inherently wired to be negative. It's a response to our evolution. It's a response to fears that we have. And so, we look for the problems, we look for the negative. And we threw a hypothesis out there one day while we were talking and said, well, what if we just started the day with something that we're proud of, something that we see that was really positive? What if it was, something that happened yesterday that you were really proud of? And what if we had some time to just brag about ourselves? What would that do? And we played with that for a little bit, and it's been a lot of fun. And I can see for myself, I mean, it's changed my perspective significantly. I've started to look at the world in a much more peaceful way, because I'm not looking exterior for positives and then interior for negatives. I'm now seeing the beauty that's everywhere. So that's the one modification that we've made. I mean, Danielle, what's that done for you as we've added the positivity? I think that's only been something that we've done for probably the last, 3 or 4 months.
I think part of it is like the whole like Pavlov theory of, because we've been so repetitive, it's like it's just like conditioned my mind before I even say anything, like I'm already like feeling positive. Like it's just
Yeah.
There's just a conditioned response because we've conditioned ourselves, we've Pavloved ourselves into
We
it.
Pavloved ourselves.
We
If our kids listen to that this
they
episode,
would
they'll love that because there's an inside joke there.
That's
yeah.
a great T-shirt. I've Pavloved myself. I
I've
like
I
Pavloved myself. Yeah. Speaking of
that's
t-shirts,
the
if you're listening to
key
this
to life,
episode and you
key
have
to
not
success.
picked up, yeah, that
Pavlov
is the
yourself.
key. If you're listening to this episode and you haven't picked up one of our Evolve t-shirts on our website, go to evolve-cast.com. We've got all of our merch up there. But think about this this Pavlov concept. We have truly Pavloved ourselves, and I'm glad that you said that you start to feel happy and positive as soon as you get into it, because it is that, like, you literally change your emotional state before you even start talking, and I feel the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the other cool thing for me is um, I love sitting here. Like we typically just, to paint the picture of how we do this. And I'm not saying everybody needs to do it the same way, but we'll do it where either Danielle's on her way to work or I'm on my way to work, whoever has to leave first. And one of us calls the other person and we talk on our way to work. And this is where we do the practice. And what's really cool for me is she'll call me or I'll call her and I'll say, okay, you ready for the practice? Or she'll say, you ready for the practice? And then I always say, okay, ladies go first. And she'll start into the positives. And before she gets going, like, I start to put a smile on my face because now here is the person that I'm connected to the most, the person I love the most, that's now talking about herself positively. And I don't even know how to explain what that does for me inside, but um, it's kind of like if you have friends and somebody else is talking bad about your friend and you want to defend your friend. um, Far too often, I think, in life, we think that it's okay to talk bad about ourselves, but we forget that we are someone else's favorite person. And so there's been times where Danielle and I have gone back and forth to each other to say, hey, don't talk bad about my best friend. And so this practice of the positive at the beginning, it just puts a huge smile on my face because I love listening to her talk about the things that she's doing really well. And it gives us, like, kind of this really cool, sometimes maybe 1 or 2 minutes to celebrate with each other
Mm-hmm.
and to pat each other on the back. Sometimes it's silly and goofy and we're making fun of each other, joking about the stuff, but yeah, it's a cool little celebration that we've added in there.
You know what's
All right.
interesting? What you've done, and I've practiced this a lot. What you've initially done is dislodge yourself from yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. From
Because,
the
and
ego, for
Steve,
sure.
you know this phrase that I'm about to say. I use it all the times. It's a phrase I got from meditation, where they say in meditation, what we aim for in meditation is to reduce our near 100% probability of a fixed response to a conditioned stimulus.
Yeah.
And early on, what you guys were talking about is what you do inside of an emotional moment is you allow yourself to pause
Mm-hmm.
and you allow yourself to feel the emotion, whether it's taking a walk. And in that time, it allows you to stop and play with the emotion and almost dislodge yourself from the emotion. And then you can play with it. Because I was thinking, what I normally do is if I have an emotion pop up and I'm in that emotional tone and I'm responding to a particular event, person, or situation, I always ask myself, who in the world would I would respond the opposite of the way I'm responding now?
Yeah. I love that
So
question.
Yep.
it's like and I'll go back to you guys with the shower, the cold water. And I'm playing like I'm Danielle and I've emotionally dislodged myself. I would ask myself, who would respond differently to this? And the
Mm-hmm.
person that would respond differently to that is Wim Hof. You know who Wim Hof is, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Oh
Right.
yeah,
for
the
sure.
cold therapy.
The
Yeah.
Yeah,
Iceman.
you throw
Yeah.
ice on him and he's gonna go, make it
like
fucking
yeah,
colder.
let's do it. Bring the
So
Breathe
gloves.
into the cold. The cold is my
yeah,
teacher.
right. So
I am
when it
one with
comes
the
to these
cold.
Yeah.
when it comes to these emotions, and it's interesting because I get a lot of it. I've grown emotionally because of my ex-wife, because I watch how my ex-wife deals with Tiago. And she deals with Tiago in a way that I think is an amazing, gentle, understanding way. And I would always deal with Tiago in this kind of hard dad way. And the hard dad way wasn't fucking working.
It works until it doesn't.
Right. And I watched how she did it. And I said, okay, if I keep a certain loving foundational dadness, but add these elements that she's using, I could
Sprinkle
come
on
up with some
some.
phenomenal shit here. And it
Yeah,
worked.
Yeah.
that's
And
yeah,
it
that's
worked.
great. That's a true artist way of like how else can this be done? How can I look at this from a different angle? I'm only looking at this angle. I need to come on this side now. So
Yeah.
you're getting a 360, and here's the emotion, and you're not attached to it. It's I can look around it from different angles.
Yeah.
Can move around. It's here, and I'm out here going around it. I'm not in it right here.
And you also gave me another great t-shirt. Thank you. How else can this be done?
Yes.
Oh, I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
Give our listeners that quote again, Miles. I know that you've brought that up before. Say that quote again.
What we aim for in meditation is to reduce our near 100% probability of a fixed response to a conditioned stimulus. And the
I love that.
stimulus, every go ahead.
I'm trying to like get my head around
Everything is
that. I know.
stimulus. Everything is
Yeah.
stimulus, right?
Right. Everything is a stimulus. And most people, most of us, usually have one way to respond to a particular stimulus. Like as
Yeah.
Steve said earlier, somebody cuts you off in traffic, you get pissed.
Sure.
That's
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
the
That's a common
stimulus is
common
the
response.
person cutting you off, and your conditioned response is to get upset.
Hmm.
Well, if you change that, all of a sudden, now that you know that you're doing it, it becomes a tool, something that you can manipulate it because most people are not aware. They just respond. They just respond. But the minute you
Hmm.
pause, feel the emotion, you can start to now navigate doing a 180 with
Yep.
that
You own it now.
response. You own it now. I had a moment in a basketball game a long time ago when I was playing college basketball where there was this big brouhaha and people were arguing. It didn't turn into a fight, but it could have. And one of the opposing guys on the bench looked at me, and I was on the court, and he said, "Number 33, why don't you shut the fuck up?" And I looked at him and I said, "Okay, I'm gonna listen to you." And they started laughing when I said that. And I remember
I love
gaining a
that.
That's
great deal of
awesome.
insight from
Okay.
that moment. It was a great insight
Okay.
because it taught me like, I could have been part of this emotional craziness, but I didn't. I flipped it, and they started laughing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And so
It's
that's what
amazing what we can do.
yeah, that's
Hmm.
the whole idea of um, conditioned responses, conditioned stimuli, all the things that we react automatically to. The minute we stop and just take a breath and go, I can change how I respond to this situation, which
Hmm.
is a great sign of emotional maturity.
Absolutely. That
Yeah.
is emotional maturity. That is it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an iterative process, and for our listeners who haven't listened to episode 63, where we call it Mastering Meditation with Miles, I would highly recommend that you go do that after this episode, because that episode, Miles walks through several meditative practices that you can employ that will help you to understand this, the personal meditative growth that you can go through. One of the things, Miles, that we've found with this practice is it's not just a great way to develop a relationship with each other on a deeper level, but it's actually a great way to develop a better relationship internally with ourselves.
Yeah.
In
Hmm.
fact, the other day, Danielle we were talking about some conflict that she had going on, and she said, "Okay, I've got to think through this." And so I come back after work, and there's a bunch of papers laid out on her desk, and she says, let me show you what I've gone through. And she's written out all of her emotions, thoughts, feelings, and then she's gone through and said, okay, based on this is what my need is, And now here's what my strategy is. These are the things that I'm going to do to accomplish this. Now, because she
Wow.
takes full accountability for it and full accountability for how she feels, what her needs are, and what her strategy is, she's not coming to me and saying, Steve, solve my problem or fix my problem. And the other thing that she's not doing is she's not venting to me. You see, this whole concept of, oh, I need to vent, not that that's a horrible thing, but science has shown that venting is oftentimes ineffective at the desired result. When we vent, especially when we vent anger, it just multiplies and we feel more angry over time. But when you go through this process of saying, here's what my emotion is, you see, you're not leading with emotion. Emotion is there, but you're actually leading with this cognitive process. The Stoics would say that this is the way to live, right? They're telling you to don't ignore your emotion, but also don't let emotion be the horse that drags you through the muck and the mire of your life. So she's got all the emotion. She's taking full accountability for how she feels. She's taking full accountability for what her internal needs are. And then she says, here's my strategy. What do you think? And sometimes we'll do this with each other where I'll say, here's what I think my strategy is. What do you think? And she'll say, well, have you thought about this? Or what about that? And we'll kind of bounce these ideas off of each other so that we can get some social proof on the strategy. Is it going to work? Is it not going to work? We know each other well.
What am I
She
missing?
might look at,
What am I not thinking
yeah,
about?
yeah, what am I missing? What am I not thinking about? Or sometimes it's literally just that we need to be called out on something. Like she'll say, Steve, that's not going to work. Like, I know you, this is what you're not going to do that. You're going to do this other thing. So that's probably a better strategy, and vice versa. We'll call each other out if the strategy is way off. Now,
Mm.
fortunately, that doesn't happen often. And I say fortunately, just because we have iterated through this process to where we know each other, we know ourselves pretty well. But it's also a really good feeling when we get called out for a strategy that is not going to work, because that's the point where we've been living in this self-deception, and that's why as a partner we can help each other to kind of break free from that. So this is a process that once we started to get into this as a couple, I would journal about it. And now I know Danielle does that from time to time. It's not like we're journaling this every day, but when we have conflict inside, we don't just explode at each other. We sometimes will write down, this is what I'm feeling, this is what my needs are, and here's what I think my strategy is. And frankly, for those of you that are listening and are saying, "Well, this sounds great," and you know, I'm going to go try it, and they're painting this beautiful picture. It doesn't mean it's easy, right? It's a simple process, but that doesn't mean it's easy. And I'll tell you that a lot of the time when we put this process together, we'll get to the point where it's strategy. And I'll look at her and I'll say, I don't know what the hell to do. Like, I know how I feel. I know what my need is. And other than my strategy of talking to you right now, I really don't know what the hell to do. And sometimes she'll say, well, have you thought about this? Or have you thought about that? And more often than not, we just look at each other and say, yeah, well, I'm sure you'll figure it out. And we give each other space for the not knowing, because there doesn't always need to be an answer or a strategy right there. And I think
Yeah.
when you talk about this holding space for another person, really that's what it is to us, is we're going to hold space that she feels a way, I feel a way, I have a need, she has a need, and we don't even know what that's going to look like to fix it. But once it's out there in the ether of the universe, we're going to figure that out over time. So Danielle, I want to just run through some questions with you, because I think it's valuable for our listeners um, to hear our perspectives and what's changed. What are some things that have improved? So, how, from your perspective, has our conflict resolution changed?
I think it was really bad. Like I think I've always been kind of more of a touchy feely person, and I would sometimes even get so wrapped up in my emotions that I'd have a hard time even just identifying them. Like when we first started doing the practice, like I would just struggle just trying to like pinpoint what my actual feelings were. I'm like, what is wrong with me? But so so what's changed is I've gotten good at like knowing I know myself better. And then like if we've gotten into conflict, um, it's real easy now to be like, if we get off track, like if we start getting nitpicky or whatever, it's also like, hold up, stop, this is silly. We know how to do this way better. And it's almost like, often it even just kind of like instantly deflates. It's not even that you always necessarily have to go on a long walk. Sometimes you still do or whatever. It's like, okay, I gotta get like head check. I gotta like rein this in. But I've found often too of just like, like we can even, there's been times where we just kind of like look at each other and it's almost like we start laughing. We've had these moments
Yeah.
where it's like, oh, okay, well, this isn't right. We're not doing this right. This is silly. Then we laugh about it. And then it's like, okay, well, this is how I'm feeling. And then we can do it. So it's, there's definitely been like a ton of progress, but it has taken, at least for me, because I don't think had a lot of I had a lot of emotions. I didn't have a lot of emotional maturity until I like really, like committed to really understand myself more and own it. That like I feel like I've grown a lot in that space that I did as a new person.
Yeah, and it's been really cool to watch. And one thing I do want to point out to our listeners, this is something that recently I was lecturing to a pretty sizable group of executives on communication and conflict resolution. We were actually talking about this topic in particular, and so as I'm lecturing to these executives, the topic of how you process emotions came up. And Danielle and I are two totally different processors. What I mean by that is not just that, like, I'm male, she's female, but Danielle is an external processor. In order for her to understand her emotions, she's got to talk about it. She's got to get it
Yeah.
out there. And along the way, she's going to figure out what that emotion is. And so as we went through this practice, I think, you started to, you would ramble and you would kind of go through stuff and then you get lost in what you were talking about. And I think one of the things that I've
Mm-hmm.
seen from my perspective is that you've gotten to the point where you're an external processor. And so you process externally by saying, let me think about this. Let me talk it through. And then you get to whatever that emotion or that feeling is pretty quick, but it's still external. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
I'm an internal processor. I think through things and then I speak. Now, the difference between external and internal processors, and here's where, as I was saying to this group the other day, where a lot of conflict can come up, is what an external processor does is they externally process what internal processors do. And so the internal processor sometimes can look at the external processor and say, why are you saying all of those things? And
Mm-hmm.
external processors sometimes
I've
can
heard
feel
that a lot.
embarrassed. Yeah. But seriously, with external processors, they've got to be comfortable with just saying, hey, I'm an external processor, so I'm going to talk this through. It might take me a minute to get to where I'm going to get to, but it's there. Internal processors far too often, and this is where I had to challenge a leader because he said, yeah, but I just think it through. And I said, but if we were to put a recorder inside of your brain, you have all of the same thoughts. You have positive thoughts, you have negative thoughts, you probably got a lot of stupid thoughts that are sitting in there. And just because there's a filter where you process internally, it doesn't mean that you're any different than the external processor. It's just the difference in how you take in that information. And man, when I said this guy's eyes open wide and goes, yeah, I've always thought to myself that if what was in my brain actually came out, people would really wonder who I am. And so internal and external processors have to understand that if you got two external processors, you guys are going to have to rein each other in because this practice could take like 5 hours. If you've got two internal processors, the practice could take 2 minutes, but it should take 10. If you have like we are, where it's an internal, external, then it can be a great balance. So there's no right or wrong way, but it's important to understand that all great relationships are built on that triad of trust, honesty, and respect. And so understanding where the other person is and respecting the way they process, it's crucial.
Right.
So I've definitely seen that change and that improvement in you, Danielle, that I think has really been cool. What are some other things that have improved, relative to your emotional development and your emotional growth?
Well, that's like personally. Well, then I just think, as the relationship piece, and then just the connection of like just feeling like we're in sync, because I know what you're going through every day. We just have that, like, we know each other better than anyone because we're connected that way. So there's just the relationship piece has its life and legs under it because we've given it life and legs. So there's the personal development, there's the relationship. I know how you're feeling. I already know how you're feeling and how your day's been because we already talked about it. We're connected. So.
Let me ask you guys something. To borrow this term from linguistics, and I'll tell a brief story, and then let you guys both chime in with your marriage if this resonates. I was arguing with a friend of mine. It was a basketball argument, and he was arguing the way it is, and I was arguing the way it should be, but I didn't know it at the time, and it created a tremendous amount of conflict. And then it dawned on me that we were not having an argument at all because we were both defending two different positions.
Yeah.
He was describing what is actually happening, and I was looking at it from an idealistic point of view of what should and could happen. And in linguistics, they call it prescriptive and descriptive language. Describers describe what events are taking place. Prescribers say this is what should happen, and it's mostly used in language. But I notice a lot of people have these kinds of debates, and they're totally unaware that they're arguing two different things, which nullifies the fact that it's not an argument. They're just not seeing their perspective. They're each respectively their perspective. Can you guys recognize anything like that?
Yeah.
Because it would seem like Steve would be a prescriber and Danielle would be a describer.
What do you think,
Does
Danielle?
that resonate at all?
Yeah, I guess it's if you're taking the time to understand the other person of what they're trying to say. Like, have you asked,
Right.
Are you out of your own head and are you trying to get in their head? Have you asked questions like, are you there just to give your perspective, or are you really like, where are they coming from? Why are they saying this? So where's your?
That's been part of our practice is the questioning, and I think that's an important thing. Rather than defending where you're at, just asking the question. So I want to make sure I understand you right. Is this what you're saying?
Right.
The other thing too that we've gotten to the point where I actually think if somebody were to kind of see us communicate from time to time and they didn't know us, we're very direct about certain things. So there might be times where Danielle's saying something or I'm saying something, and one of us is not really hearing the essence of what they're saying. And so she'll look at me or I'll look at her and say, no, you're not understanding what I'm saying.
Missing the boat.
Yeah, or you're missing the boat. And it's very direct, right? It's not mean, but it's direct. And that, again, when we talk about this common lexicon, this common language, like we talked about with cold water, if we look at each other and say, no, you're not hearing me. See, when we say you're not hearing me, what we mean is you're not hearing my emotion. You're not hearing the intent. You're not hearing what's going behind, this.
It's being filtered because it's like Steve might bring something to me and then I'm thinking that he's meaning this. And then I'm like, acting off, like just what you said. It's like, I interpreted it to mean this. And then it's like, no, that you're missing the whole point. Like that's you're missing the context of like what the real point is. And it's like, okay, back up. What do you mean by that? Like where, it's like, okay, I got to ask some questions because my head went here, my filters took me here, and I'm not seeing the right perspective. And so it's like time to ask questions.
And if he's filtering his response, if he's filtering himself, you're not getting a complete picture of what he's trying to say.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like we talked about, I mean, the skill set. So when you think about this skill set that you have to develop, it's a two-pronged skill set. It's the ability to understand your emotions, needs, and your strategy, and being able to communicate that in words that the other person is going to understand.
Right. Yeah.
But on
Yeah.
the other end, it's about understanding when somebody communicates to you their emotion, their needs, and their strategy. You have to be able to hear that. And
Mm-hmm.
here we talk about from the heart, right? So you have to understand, like Danielle was talking about, the context, the intent. But then sometimes when we say, no, you're not listening, then there might be some details that are being missed in there.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
hear is heart, listen is ears, and those are the common language terms that we use. But it's a two-pronged approach. You have to be able to communicate without a filter externally, and then you have to be able to take it in. And those two skills are paramount to success. At any time in this cycle of communication, you can see some sort of breakdown in there. So I think that the listening and the practice itself gets rid of a lot of that, because we don't really, if we're interrupting or we're interjecting when the other person is doing their practice, more often than not, it's just to nod and to say, oh yeah, that sucks, I'm sorry. Or, it's something that's supportive. Or if it's celebratory, hey, I feel happy and I'm excited. Yeah, that's really cool, right? We're supporting, we're empathizing with what the other person is saying. Very rarely is there any interjection while the other person is talking about their emotion or their feelings. So I think oftentimes, Miles, like you talked about with these two different ways of communicating, you get rid of that with this practice, because you're talking about the emotion, the need, and the strategy. And
Mm-hmm.
when you get into that rhythm and that cadence, the skills just develop, and you kind of fly by that that ability that you have to create that chasm.
Yeah.
So Danielle, we talked a little bit about how this changed you personally. Um, I want to ask you, as we've done this practice, what are the changes you've seen in me? Um, we've gone through this, you've had some changes, you've seen it in our relationship, but what's changed in me from your perspective?
Like just overall or during practice or
Yeah, from doing the practice, how is this, what are some changes that you've seen?
um I think you hold the space more of like of the listening and understanding me. Like um there's more of a comfort that I have with you, of that you're, I guess it's just from a maturity, I don't know, of that. I know if I come with our um boundaries that we've set, that I'm not going to attack, I'm not going to blame, I'm just going to, if I'm going to open up and share how I'm feeling, like I have complete trust that you've got those skills, that it's going to be well received. So there's a lot of um, I don't know, just a different. It's just a different level of our relationship. There's I
It's like a safety, I think,
yeah. There's a lot
is
of
what it sounds
safety.
like.
Yeah, there's a lot of safety that exist in the relationship. Well, you've always been a great communicator, so that you've always been a leader and a communicator, and that's just always been there, and taught the kids, and always had that great communication skills. That's just always been there for you. But I'm trying to think of what else has changed. I guess
But I
the
think that's a big one.
safety.
I
Yeah.
think that's a big one I want to point out for the men listening to this podcast, because men inherently, when we want to be fixers, and that was
Mhm.
something I remember one time in particular where we were going through the practice, and I had made a couple of comments, and probably well intended, but I'm just wired at that state to try and fix, to try and provide solutions
Yeah,
to
that's
problems
probably
or
been
to
the biggest.
discuss.
Yeah. Hmm.
And yeah, I remember like it created a massive conflict. We ended up having to get off the phone and talk later at night about it. And we didn't get through the full practice because I had screwed that up to the level where, I wasn't hearing, I wasn't listening. It was more so like I'm coming in to fix it. And, this was something that I had a coaching client bring up recently to me and said, so, but don't you feel like you have to fix it? And I said, yes, initially I did. But what happened, that was part of my emotional growth is I had to learn how to hold space longer and to just
Hmm. I
wait
needed
and to
a lot
listen.
more. Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think
and I
as
think
That
men,
was
we
especially
need to
funny.
those,
learn that because I've been
Yeah.
yeah,
accused of
men
No.
that
men need
too.
to learn that. Men need to
Yeah,
learn
Yep.
that
I've been accused
probably
of
more
that
than
too.
anything.
I've
And
heard many
it's a
times in my
really
life
common
women
thing.
saying, I don't need you to fix it. I just need you
Yeah.
to hear
Yeah.
me.
Yep.
Yeah, I've heard that quite
Huge.
some time in my life. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. It's huge.
The interesting thing, I think, from my perspective, and that conflict that we had, where I had really upset Danielle on the phone that one day, it
What
caused me to
day?
pause and
When
hold
was this?
back yesterday.
Okay.
That was a while back. I'm sure you got it written down in your journal. Um, no, you're not a scorekeeper. So that when that happened, I paused and I had to reflect and say, okay, why am I doing this? Like, what's my emotion? What am I feeling in that moment? And why do I feel the need to jump in to fix it? And it was funny when I asked myself that question, the whole thing just dissipated. The need went away because I thought, I don't have that need, because the need is coming from this ego of, I need to feel proud that I can fix a problem. But it's like, well, that's not even my problem. This is Danielle's emotion. This is something that she wants to fix. She needs to fix it. And as soon as I let that go and I started to practice just shutting the hell up and holding more space,
Hmm.
Hmm.
it was amazing what it did for me. I started to notice that I was seeing more nuance to Danielle's beauty in how she thought and how she handled things and how she was analyzing and how she was working through this stuff. And so I sort of feel this sense of pride. And I thought, man, this is really cool to see what's happening inside of her. But I got a sense of love, a sense of admiration, and really this feeling of um, connectedness. Because now, instead of trying to jump in to fix something, we're emotionally connecting better because I'm able to
Hmm.
sit there, take it in, and feel it. And so I feel much more emotionally connected. Now, it doesn't take away the need to fix. I think as men, we are wired that way. But what
And you're
happens
good
is
at it.
every once in a
Yeah.
while, right. I mean,
You're.
that's something that I think through my career, I've been able to solve problems, whether it's solving a business problem or helping to solve a conflict between people in relationships or whatever it is. But I don't need to do it all the time. And what I found was my need is not to do that all the time. In fact, if I do that a lot, then it just drains me. And what shifted was as soon as I started listening more and just holding more space, the times where Danielle would say to me, hey, I'm not sure about the strategy, or hey, what do you think about this, or hey, can you help me? It was it was even more meaningful because A, she's
Hmm.
asking for it, and B, um, it was a more complicated problem. And so I could put my mind to the test at that point rather than just saying, well, stop doing this and start doing that. The simple
Never
problems
works.
she can fix on her own. And
Yeah.
and I don't get anything out of that. So the emotional rewards from doing that were just really unexpected and pretty cool. So I think that's been a fun thing. I'm glad that we had that conflict, um,
Yeah.
which is another thing I want to bring up, that far too often in life, we get to the point where we avoid conflict because we're afraid of it. And I've always said that I'm a big fan of conflict because the best relationships that I have in life are the people that I've had the most conflict with. I don't love conflict to combat, right? I'm not looking to fight with another person. But the way I view conflict is that we have a conflict of ideas. Sometimes we have a conflict of ideals. And so, from an ideological thought process standpoint, or an ideal or a morality standpoint, we may see things in two different ways. That's okay. because that means that there is a space we can come to where your perspective and my perspective are going to help each other to raise to a higher level. So if you're listening to this podcast and you say, but I don't like conflict, I'm an avoider of conflict, jump in. Don't jump in to fight, but jump in to do the practice, because I can tell you on the other end of conflict, there are great things. Now, we're not talking about burn the bridges. That's why we're talking about this practice of emotion, need, and strategy. If you apply this, you're going to get through the conflict. Um, Danielle, I want to go through the practice with you, if that's okay. And really just imagine that, we're doing this on a day-to-day basis, because I think it's important not only to talk about what it is, but I think it's helpful for our listeners to hear what that practice looks like. So does that sound good?
Yeah, I did. Okay, sure. Let's do it.
So we'll do our normal practice. If you're a listener of the podcast, you can imagine that Danielle and I are driving to work, or one of us is working at home for the day and the other one's driving to work. And so we've called up each other, and here we are on the phone. And so I tell Danielle, hey, ladies first, and she's going to start out with her positives, and then she's going to jump into the practice. And the reason we're doing this, and I've got to be honest with you, I probably should have said this at the beginning of the podcast, is not to put ourselves on some sort of pedestal. It's not to tell you that we have everything figured out and we have a perfect relationship and a perfect marriage, and it's nothing like that. But there's always a risk in socially with putting something out there like this. The risk is to be viewed as people who think of themselves as great or good or better than somebody else. And that's certainly not the case. We'll be the first to admit that the conflict and the challenges that we've had, we think that they're similar to what everybody else has gone through. There are times where the battles have been fierce and intense. There are mistakes that have been made. There are stupid decisions that we've made. And so I don't want to misrepresent anything. The reason why we chose to do this episode is because coming through on the other end of this, uh, with not having great conflict resolution skills before, and then saying, "Hey, I think we're pretty well practiced at this, at least to the point where we've seen some very positive changes in our relationship." We hoped that this would inspire somebody. Maybe you're a guy in your 40s or 50s, and you just struggle with opening up emotionally to your wife. Maybe you're a woman that is going through a divorce and you don't know how to communicate effectively to your now ex, husband. Or when you're going out dating and you're trying to determine, what does this look like? I don't care what stage of life you're at. This practice is going to benefit you. So as we go through this, just understand we're trying to help and show a way. And however you apply this and whatever works well for you in your own personal practice, we hope that not only is this effective for you, but we'd love to hear from you on what's working. All right. So Danielle, you're in the car. I'm in the car. We're driving to work. And ladies first.
Okay. I am feeling positive today about the fact that I got up at 5 a.m. this morning to do my workout, because I have been, I like to get up at least by 5:30, if not 6, but I have been very lazy with my workouts lately, and it's down to nothing, like, especially since you've been sick, where I just like kind of made excuses, and just because of my own problems I've been dealing with, I'm like, I'm not going to keep my routine. So I broke the chain. I got myself my butt out of bed at 5 a.m. and I got my workout in, and I did a little like hip hop class before I did my weight training, like just online at home. I just did this at home, and just so I could like get warmed up and loose and enjoy it, just to make it fun again. And then did my weights, and I did some sprints up the road and saw the stars this morning, and it was really pretty. And I think I saw Mars or whatever. It was like glowing orange, and I love seeing stars. So it started my day off really good where I'm like, okay, I can conquer this day and I can do it. So that's my positive is I got my butt out of bed and I did my workout. It was at home. I didn't go to the gym, but I did it. So that counts.
That's awesome.
And then I'm feeling overworked. I'm feeling like I want more fun and adventure. Because of just my personal work stress I've had, and then if you've been sick and trying to get over the cough and all the coughing and the sickness and stuff. So I've been feeling like, okay, we're getting to the tail end of me dealing with my crap, you being sick, and I'm ready for my need is the next chapter. My need is to, okay, we've we've dealt with the bum crap that's not fun. I need some fun. My need is for adventure, fun that we've got. I can't even believe it's Thanksgiving next week. So um, I'm needing to feel like next weekend we can unplug from um, problems and then whatever just normal day to day, the grind of work and have some, good family. I'm really needing some good family connection and fun time, building memories, getting out of the grind of the day to day. So my strategy is to make sure we're connecting because I don't know. I'm forgetting what everybody's work schedules is like with Carly of what days she can be there with us the whole time. I want to make sure we have the plans of um, this is, obviously we have the Thanksgiving day, but like for that weekend of like, can we go skiing or do we just plan some hikes or what's our connection time gonna look like? I want the fun adventure, um, family connection unplugged from the grind. So if we can like figure out connecting with all the kids, making sure we know what days they're going to be up. If we're going up to the cabin, what days is everyone going to be there to make sure we've figured out our ski days or what that's going to look like.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that I'm looking forward to it, and great job on the practice.
Yeah.
So I think the positives for me, like you, I was excited. You were kind of tossing and turning this morning, and that woke me up even before my normal wake up time. But when I woke up, I was just wide awake and popped up, went through my normal routine. Uh, and this is the first day in about 2 weeks that I've been able to go through my normal routine. And while my workout was really short this morning, because I just don't have a ton of energy from being sick, I felt great going through the workout, and it actually gave me a lot of energy throughout the morning and into the day. So I feel really positive about that. We've got some great stuff going on at work, and I had a super positive conversation with an old friend today that just made me feel really happy. He had shared some things with me, that he had seen with what we're doing on the podcast and my speaking and consulting, and gave me some perspective that I think I was just blind to because I tend to discount myself and my skills. So I felt very positive about that and really happy that I've got great friends in my life. Also super positive about the fact that we've been talking about this particular episode for a really long time, and I feel positive about the conversation, and I'm looking forward to the feedback that we're going to get from people who start to apply this practice. So those are my positives. I think the most dominant emotion right now that I feel is just one of gratitude. I feel this strong sense of gratitude for people in my life. Obviously, you for coming on and doing this conversation. Miles, the connection that the three of us have. One of my favorite pictures um, is the three of us together at the symphony. We had asked Miles to go to the symphony, and his date showed up later, and so there were just the three of us standing out
Yeah.
there at the symphony. And I've always had this gratitude for Miles, obviously gratitude for you for coming onto the podcast. So I think my need really is to live in gratitude right now and to live in gratitude for the next few days. As we go into Thanksgiving, it's always a great time for me to reflect and to pause and to just feel a sense of gratitude and be more conscientious of it. And so my strategy is that from now until Thanksgiving, I'm going to spend more time every day journaling on the things that I'm grateful for. And what I found in the past when I do that is I tend to get really nitpicky with all the things that are cool in life, and that's always a nice reset at this time of the year. So, um, I think that's my first strategy. The second strategy is to start to express that to more people when I feel that gratitude, because I love being able to give that feedback to other people. So um, that's my practice for the day. All right. So imagine, if we were in the car at that point, we would say, "Hey, thanks, love you," and we'd go on with our day. Now, we've chosen to do the practice primarily in the mornings because it just works in our schedule. It's kind of the time that helps us to kickstart the day. I don't know that there's a time of the day that works better other than just what works for you. So if you decide to do this practice and utilize Rosenberg's method of nonviolent communication, use it as a free throw, do it in the times where stress is not heightened. And more often than not, like Danielle talked about, what she talked about relative to her emotions, needs, and her strategy had nothing to do with me. I mean, yes, I'm going to be there and we're going to be in the family time and maybe we need to plan the family time. Um, the thing that I expressed was more about gratitude, but essentially we're not dealing with any conflict there. And that's important because what you're trying to do when you're practicing is develop your ability to shoot the free throws when there is no pressure on. The game isn't on the line, and so you're practicing before the pressure gets on there. All right, Miles. So this last little bit, as we've been going through the practice, I know you're a very astute listener and observer. I'd love to get your feedback on the practice and knowing both of us. What are you seeing?
Well, I love the end. I love what you guys just did when you guys demonstrated the practice. I actually thought that was really cool. It's funny. Um, like if I were to picture some people in a car that go into work together, and somebody might be silent, somebody might be rambling about something, but it seems like when you have this planned type of conversation, I could easily see how once the first person gets out of the car and says, "Honey, have a great day," whoever it is, I could just see how it could kind of charge your day.
Mm-hmm.
That you have this planned way of speaking with each other, and anything can come up, but it also opens the door to creative things that you might want to do.
Yeah.
We're talking about hiking, and and you're expressing your emotion, which means that during the course of a day, at any point, one of you might pause and think about what the other person has said, and then can come up with an idea of like, oh, let me augment that. Or if it's something that's negative, like, what am I thinking? So if it's something negative, say you, Danielle, you get out of the car first, you're going to work, you both have expressed, Steve has said some things, a couple of things that are inner conflicts with him, not with you, and then you get home earlier and you think, oh, how can I, without even talking about his negative emotion, prepare something that really could is mood altering, or vice versa.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or vice
Mm-hmm.
versa. Danielle, you get out of the car and Steve drives off, and he's really been listening to what you're saying, and he thinks, huh, what can I bring home? What can I do at home to just alter that little thing she was talking about? And it just opens up this tremendous can of worms for like so much stuff. And I don't think people do that. I don't think people
No.
do that. I think it's really specific. I think people basically listen to the other in terms of just kind of hearing, okay, 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 and and when they drive off, nothing is it. It just sounds like a creative way to start the day off, dealing with your own emotional state and well-being, whether it's negative or positive.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's what I heard. That's I took a lot. It's funny. I took a lot from that. That was really interesting.
There's a lot that comes from it. And I think that, I'll give you one example. So a couple of weeks ago, I just in passing, I looked in the cupboard and my favorite little espresso mug that has its little saucer. It's got these, this Porsche Martini Racing, which I love Porsches. I love martini racing. Like I love all that kind of stuff, right? So this is kind of that's the holy grail of my espresso time in the morning. And I looked in there and the plate was broken. And so I just kind of made mental note of it. And then when I saw Danielle, I said, "Hey, did you know that what happened to the plate? Did did you break it?" She goes, "Yeah, I broke it." And
And I was
then
walking
and
up
I
the
could,
stairs, and yeah, it just
yeah, she just kind of went on about the day, and like it was totally uncharacteristic of her to, um, to respond like that. But I could tell she was busy. I could tell she was going to something else. And later on, it registered this emotion that I was like, God, that kind of made me feel bad. But bad's a garbage term. What did I really feel? And I felt sad. I felt like, normal. It was just the difference between happiness and sadness often is just the difference of our expectations. And my expectation, because she is typically so kind, loving, and apologetic when something like that happens, and I didn't get that. I thought, oh well, that just made me sad because it didn't meet my expectation. And so, um, but I also could tell that there was something going on. She was, in her head, something else was happening. And so later, and maybe it was a day or two later, I said, "Hey, can I just share something with you?" The other day when I mentioned my broken little saucer, it's not a big deal, to be honest with you. It really is not, and mistakes happen. So I'm not mad. I'm not upset about it. But it did make me feel sad. It made me feel sad because normally when something like that happens, you tell me about it. And then when I asked you about it, you moved on really quickly. And I didn't even finish talking about how I felt to get to what my need was. And she looks at me, she says, "I know, I feel so bad. I'm so sorry. I actually didn't tell you because I was going to try and fix it first and then talk to you about it. And I had this plan. And then when you brought it up, I was working and thinking about, X, Y, and Z." And she goes, "I know I didn't handle that in the way that that met your emotional needs, and I'm sorry." So we didn't even need to get to emotion, need, and strategy. It was just
Right.
simply me sharing, and she just jumped in, knew what my need was, gave me the strategy essentially, and that fixed it. And it was less than a minute conversation. Uh, if I'm putting it on the time clock, and it made a huge difference. There was another time recently where, um, I've been working a lot, and I've been, dealing with the ups and downs of startup life. And she had expressed to me that she didn't feel like she was as supported around the house, and that she was taking a lot of the load around the house, and that she didn't, she had a need to feel more support. And so as we talked through it, I realized there were two things happening. One, she needed more um, jobs done around the house. She was feeling like she was doing too many jobs and I wasn't doing enough. But then the jobs that I was doing, she didn't even recognize that I was doing those. And so it was like, "Hey, what do you need? Do you need to see that I'm doing these jobs? Do you need to be told?" She goes, "Yeah, I actually need to be told
I
that
do.
that you're
Yeah,
doing
so
that
like, yes,
job,
please tell me when you're
because
doing it. It makes me
when
feel
the
better.
toilet's clean, I just see that the toilet's clean, but I don't know you clean the toilet." And that it brought up this funny conversation between us where I said, "Well, I don't want to like dance and sing and say, 'Oh, I clean the toilet.' But
No,
then
I really
like
want
I
you to
actually do
dance and
that now."
sing. Actually
And
want you to
she's
dance and
like,
sing and tell me you
"No,
clean
you
the
got to
toilet.
tell me, because if it's not bad, I'm not picking up on it." But then the other thing I did is I thought, well, all right, before I go to the gym in the morning, I typically have about a 5 to 10 minute window where, I'm packing up, I'm getting ready to go. What if I took that 5 to 10 minutes and I just started doing something around the house? I could sweep, I could unload the dishwasher, and I started doing these little things within this little 5 to 10 minute time slot, right? Just a small deposit.
Uh-huh.
So later that day, I came home. I said, "Hey, did you notice?" She goes, "Oh my gosh, I was just going to say thank you for doing the dishes. Thanks for doing this." Well, this emotion needs strategy, where she told me how she felt. She told me what her need was. Her need was for me to communicate what I was doing, but then also to take the burden of a little bit more. And I've done other things, but it was literally that 5 minutes in the morning where emotionally things shifted in the relationship and her need was met. And she goes, "This is great. I love this." And so, then that becomes motivating for me because I want to make her feel better by doing these things. And so then I'm going to do it more often and I'm going to do other things. So you're right, Miles, that there are times where when we share these things with each other, um, we sometimes don't even necessarily get to the strategy where the other person comes up and says, "Hey, let me take strategy on this. Let me do that." Right. And we don't always use that verbiage. We don't always say, "Let me do the strategy." But we may say, "Hey, well, what if I did this? Or would this be helpful?" So we're intonating strategy, but we're not using that verbiage all the time. So we're talking about what we can do to help meet each other's needs in a way that's going to be supportive. We want to support each other in all aspects of life. I want Danielle to be happy. I want her to be able to succeed in her career, and I believe in her that she can do all of these things. But at the same time, I want to be here to support her in the ways that I can contribute, and vice versa. And there are days like you referenced, Miles, where if I'm having a bad day, I come home. I mean, you've been over here, right? You know how the house smells. Like it just the whole house is filled with Danielle's cooking. And some days it gets filled even more with her cooking because she knows I'm having a not so great day. And so it's almost like she uses more aromatic ways of cooking on days where she knows that I need a little bit more. So
Well, it
I can
changes
pull in the
state.
garage and I can,
That's
yeah,
right.
it does. I can
Yeah,
smell it
aromatic are state
from the front.
changers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know
Out
one thing,
front or in the
Danielle. I
garage.
hope if he ever cleans the refrigerator out, and after he does it, he starts breakdancing, singing "I just cleaned the refrigerator." I hope you get a video of that.
Okay. Deal. He did clean
I
the
already did that
refrigerator
one.
out recently and
Yeah, that was
organized
my
it.
last big project.
That was the
Yeah.
big one.
She was really
Yeah.
happy about that. Yeah.
But it is
Well,
true, like, of knowing your audience, like, no, it wasn't for me. It was a much about doing the job as telling me he did the job, because then I know he's communicating in my language of, I want you to make a big deal about it because it's a big deal to me and you're doing this for me and it makes me happy and excited and it's fun. And so that's like a big deposit for me. So it is like silly, but yeah, it's huge. It's little and it's
Yeah.
huge.
And it's the silliness that made it
you've
fun.
given us like a bunch of really, I should have wrote them all down. What was it? Pavlov yourself, know your
Pavlov
audience.
yourself.
Have love yourself.
And there was another one, know your audience. I like that because in the context of a
Yeah.
relationship,
Yeah.
that's very powerful. Know your audience. And there
Yeah.
was something
Right.
else you said. It was like three of them that I thought, oh, this is a great three T-shirts.
You're gonna have to listen to this episode after we put
Go
it out.
back,
Yeah,
get it.
Get all the
yeah, because
cuts.
I want to
Yeah.
get that.
Yeah. Well, one thing I would say, and we're getting on our time here that we need to start wrapping it up. But know your audience. That's something that we talk about. That's a common phrase in our relationship because we both work outside of the home. We have kids that we love and that we want to support, but they're at a stage of life now where two of them are older and in college and working, and one of them is home at high school. But they're running in multiple directions, and we both work jobs outside of the home, and we're both very busy. I mean, there have been times like last year, for instance, Danielle had her full-time job, and then she was a full-time coordinator of our daughter's drill team. Our daughter was a
Wow.
captain of the drill team, which meant that Danielle, as the captain's mom, was in charge of coordinating all of the events. And it literally was a full-time job. I mean, I started counting out the hours where I would see
It
her
was a
early
lot.
in the morning until, we're in bed, and still 11, 12 o'clock at night, she's still working on this stuff. Um, and so supporting each other through this process, it's not just something that has improved our relationship with each other, and it's not just something that has improved our emotional intelligence by understanding what our emotions, needs, and strategies are, but it has helped in every aspect of life. Communication with our kids, communication in the workplace. This is something that permeates. And, we don't have the time to get too deep into it today, but essentially when you start to practice this stuff, you're going to find that you will find ways in the workspace to implement this process, and it will help you to develop great relationships, to get ahead. I've always said, and I mentioned this last week when I was lecturing to a group of leaders, that there's 3 things that you need to do to get ahead in business. The first one is your performance. The second one is your relationships. And then the third one is the political game. And, your performance is how do you actually show up and perform on a day-to-day basis. The next one is the relationships. It's the who you know. And developing great relationships is all about developing these skills of nonviolent communication. And then the third one of playing a political game is really nothing more, nothing less than being seen at the times where you need to be seen in a very positive way. And learning how to communicate in tough situations is probably one of the most important skills that you can take into the workplace. So this practice doesn't just work in the intimate relationships of your life, but it will work across the board. So, folks, we are coming up on our time, and I would say that on that note, it is time for us to wrap up another episode of the Evolve podcast. We want to thank our guest, the most important guest that we've had on so far.
You know it.
Thanks for coming on and having this conversation.
You're welcome. It was fun to be here. 2 of my favorite people right here. So
yeah, it was just good to see you.
No, miss you, Miles.
It's the magic triad right here, right?
I know, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And I also want to thank my co-host W. Miles Riley. So Danielle, I don't know why you're flashing to New York there, Miles.
Because the Giants are doing well.
Yeah, there you go. Typically, we ask our guests of what's the best way to follow your personal evolution and your growth. And I would say we probably just tell them to follow Evolve and listen to the episodes. And, Danielle is a force behind Evolve, because all of the concepts that we talk about here, all of the things that we put out are tested on each other. And so, this is, if you have questions, reach out to me on my Instagram, or you can reach out to us on Evolve. And that's the best way for you to spark some conversation there. So I would challenge our listeners to go out and start to practice these techniques that we talked about tonight. Start small, start when the emotions are not high. And over time, you're going to notice some development inside of yourself. You will improve your relationships overall from an intimate standpoint, but also in the relationships in work and other areas of your life. So remember, folks, that it takes time and consistency to evolve. But first, you have to disrupt. And now it's time for you to get out there and evolve.
And evolve.
Have love yourself.
Thank you for listening to the Evolve Podcast. If you like this episode, share it with your friends. Follow us on Instagram at Evolve_cast and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcasting app. And now it's time for you to get out there and evolve.